No more back doors. This is my house.
This happened last Thanksgiving, and I'm still processing everything that went down. Fair warning, this gets pretty intense and involves some serious family drama that completely destroyed relationships. But sometimes people need to learn that treating others like garbage has consequences. I've been married to Sarah for 4 years now. Her family, the Blackwells, are what you'd call old money types. At least they present themselves that way. They live in this massive colonial house with perfectly trimmed hedges, cobblestone pathways, and enough crystal chandeliers to light up a small city. Everything about their lifestyle screams wealth and refinement, from the way they arrange their dinner parties to how they talk about their yearly trips to Martha's Vineyard. The problem is, I come from a completely different world. My dad worked construction his whole life. My mom cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. I put myself through college doing manual labor and gradually worked my way up in commercial real estate. Not glamorous work, but honest work that taught me the value of every dollar and every deal. From day one, the Blackwells made it crystal clear that I wasn't their kind of people. It started small, little comments about my humble beginnings or jokes about how Sarah had married down socially. They'd ask when I was going to get a real job in finance or law, completely dismissing the fact that I was actually doing quite well in property management. But the real humiliation came during family gatherings. Every single holiday, birthday party, or family barbecue followed the same degrading routine. I'd pull up to their circular driveway in my pickup truck, usually carrying some expensive bottle of wine or whiskey as a peace offering. I'd walk up to the front entrance like any normal guest would, only to have Sarah meet me at the door with that apologetic look in her eyes. "Kitchen entrance today," she'd whisper, glancing back to make sure her parents weren't watching. "You've been working all day, and guests are using the front door. You understand, right?" And like an idiot, I'd nod and walk around to the side of their house, past their manicured gardens and imported stone features, to enter through the service door like I was delivering groceries. Once inside, I'd find myself relegated to the kitchen while everyone else mingled in their formal living spaces. I'd sit on a bar stool at their granite island, eating off paper plates while they dined on fine china under antique chandeliers. The catering staff would buzz around me, and I'd overhear Sarah's relatives making jokes about the blue-collar husband who got lucky enough to marry into their family. Sarah's father, Robert, perfected this art of talking down to me without technically being rude. He'd pat my shoulder and say things like, "Keep working hard, sport," or ask if I needed help understanding the stock market discussions happening in the next room. Sarah's mother, Victoria, was even worse. She'd smile sweetly and suggest I might be more comfortable watching the football game in the den, rather than joining their adult conversations about politics and business. The worst part wasn't even their condescension. It was how Sarah just let it happen. She'd shrug it off with, "That's just how they are," or "Don't let them get to you." She never once stood up for me or questioned why her husband had to sneak in through the back door of family gatherings. I started to wonder if she was actually embarrassed by me too. But here's what none of them knew, what they never bothered to ask about during all those years of dismissing me as some lucky blue-collar guy who married above his station. I own their house, and about 40 other properties throughout the state. See, while they were busy playing aristocrat and looking down on my simple real estate work, I was quietly building one of the most successful commercial property empires in the region. My company, Sterling Holdings, manages everything from downtown office complexes to luxury apartment buildings. I've got contracts with the city, relationships with major developers, and a portfolio worth more money than their entire extended family could dream of. That beautiful colonial mansion they're so proud of, I bought it from the bank 3 years ago when they were 6 months behind on mortgage payments. Robert had made some spectacularly bad investments, and they were facing foreclosure. The bank was ready to auction it off when I stepped in and purchased it outright. I let them stay as tenants paying below market rent because Sarah begged me to save her childhood home. They had no idea their landlord was the same man they made eat Thanksgiving dinner in the kitchen. So last Thanksgiving arrives, and I'm going through the same humiliating routine I've endured for years. I show up with a bottle of aged scotch, something that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Sarah meets me at the front door wearing this cream-colored dress that matches her mother's taste for neutral, expensive fabrics. "Guests are using the front entrance," she says without even looking me in the eye. "You've been working all day. You understand the situation, right?" I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. that mixture of anger and resignation I'd learned to swallow. But I nodded like always and handed over the scotch, our fingers brushing for just a moment before she turned away. I walked around to the kitchen entrance, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway they'd had professionally installed last summer. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd technically paid for that driveway through property maintenance expenses. I passed by their newly landscaped gardens, their imported garden furniture, all the little touches they used to demonstrate their refined taste to the neighbors. The kitchen was already bustling with activity when I entered. Professional caterers in black uniforms were arranging appetizer trays, while the massive turkey roasted in their commercial-grade oven. I took my usual spot at the kitchen island, unbuttoned my flannel shirt at the collar, and poured myself a drink from the bottle I'd brought. The sounds of the dinner party drifted in from the formal dining room. Polite laughter, the clink of crystal wine glasses, conversations about vacation homes and private school tuition costs. I could hear Robert telling some story about his golf game while Victoria discussed the charity gala she was organizing. None of them acknowledged my presence, even though several of their guests walked through the kitchen and saw me sitting there like part of the hired help. Victoria swept into the kitchen wearing pearls that probably cost more than my truck. She paused when she saw me perched on the bar stool, her eyebrows raising slightly as she smoothed her cashmere cardigan. "Oh," she said with that fake smile that never reached her eyes. "I didn't realize you'd chosen kitchen duty tonight." She gestured toward the dining room where I could see their guests seated around the mahogany table under sparkling chandeliers. The table was set for 12 people with silk napkins folded into intricate shapes and enough silverware to stock a restaurant. "We have plenty of room at the table?" she continued, though her tone suggested otherwise. I kept my expression neutral and took another sip of scotch. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," I replied, my voice as cool as I could manage. I'd learned over the years that showing emotion just gave them more ammunition to use against me. Victoria's smile tightened. "Well, Frank will handle the serving," she said, using the name Robert always called me when he thought no one important was listening. Then she clicked away on her designer heels, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the catering staff who at least treated me like a human being. I sat there picking at a turkey sandwich one of the caterers had made, watching my reflection in the stainless steel backsplash. Dark eyes, strong jawline, the face of a man who'd built everything he owned from nothing. They saw a working-class husband who'd gotten lucky. I saw someone who'd earned every inch of respect he deserved, even if these people were too blind to give it. The dining room continued its symphony of forced politeness while I ate my sandwich in the kitchen like a servant. I could hear them discussing non-essential topics, the weather, neighborhood gossip, complaints about their golf club's new policies. They laughed at inside jokes and shared stories about people I'd never be invited to meet. For years, I'd listened to them dismiss my work as playing with buildings, while they inherited their wealth and called it success. That's when everything changed. I was halfway through my dry sandwich when the front door opened with the kind of authority that makes everyone stop talking. A deep, commanding voice boomed through the house. That better be Victoria's famous stuffing I'm smelling, because I drove 2 hours for this meal. I didn't even have to look up to know who it was. Marcus Wellington, one of the most powerful commercial developers on the East Coast and my biggest client. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd closed billion-dollar deals and had city mayors on speed dial. What the hell was he doing here? Marcus walked into the kitchen like he owned every room he entered, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit tailored to perfection. He had this presence that demanded attention from anyone with half a brain. The kind of natural authority that comes from years of making decisions that affect entire city blocks. He spotted me at the kitchen island, and his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Hey there, boss," he said loud enough for the entire house to hear. The word boss echoed through the kitchen and into the dining room like a bang. The effect was immediate and devastating. The entire house fell silent. No more polite chatter, no clinking glasses. Even the oven seemed to stop humming. I could see Sarah in the doorway, her wine glass trembling in her hand, her face drained of all color. Behind her, Robert stood frozen with his napkin still clutched in his fist, his mouth hanging open like a fish. I stood up slowly and extended my hand to Marcus, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Good to see you, Marcus. Didn't expect to run into you here tonight." His grin widened as he clasped my hand in both of his, giving me that shoulder clap, reserved for people he genuinely respected. Wouldn't miss Victoria's Thanksgiving for anything, he said, completely oblivious to the tension filling the room. Listen, I can't thank you enough for that Burlington project. Sterling Holdings made the whole deal possible. I could feel every eye in the house turning toward us. Sarah's sister had appeared in the kitchen doorway, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Uncle Howard, who had once called me just a guy who got lucky with Alina, stood there looking like he'd seen a ghost. Marcus kept talking, his voice carrying easily into the dining room where everyone was now straining to hear every word. The City Planning Commission was giving me hell about those zoning variances, but your connections smoothed everything over. And don't get me started on the permit process. What should have taken 6 months you got done in 3 weeks. He leaned against the kitchen counter, completely comfortable and unaware that he was detonating bombs with every sentence. I've been telling everyone in the industry, if you want real estate done right in this state, you call Sterling Holdings. This guy knows every commissioner, every inspector, every legal loophole worth knowing. The silence in that kitchen was so complete, I could hear the antique clock ticking in the hallway. Victoria gripped the back of a dining chair so hard her knuckles went white. Robert made this strangled laughing sound that died in his throat before it could become actual laughter. Marcus turned toward Robert with a puzzled expression. "Didn't realize the house was so quiet tonight," he said, gesturing around at the stunned faces. "Usually you folks keep things pretty lively during the holidays." Robert's voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. We didn't realize you two were so well acquainted." Marcus's eyebrows shot up in amusement. "Acquainted? Hell, I wouldn't have made half my deals this year without Sterling Holdings backing me up. Your son-in-law here runs one of the most successful property management companies in the region. I trust him with deals worth tens of millions." The word millions hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched as the reality of what Marcus was saying sank into every face around me. These people who'd spent years calling me blue-collar, who'd made me eat in the kitchen while they toasted each other in the dining room, were slowly realizing they'd been completely wrong about who I was. "Actually," Marcus continued, turning back to me with that conspiratorial tone successful men use when they're talking shop, "I've got a couple new projects coming up that might interest you. That waterfront development we discussed? The investors are ready to move forward, but they want Sterling Holdings handling the property management side." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through what I assumed were project details. We're talking about a 50-unit luxury complex plus retail space on the ground floor. The kind of project that could define a city's downtown for the next 20 years. I nodded professionally, aware that everyone was hanging on our conversation like it was a soap opera. "Send me the details and I'll review the numbers," I said, keeping my voice level despite the satisfaction burning in my chest. Marcus clapped me on the back one more time. "You're the reason I stay ahead of schedule and under budget on these builds. Even my competitors ask me who handles my properties. I tell them straight up, if you want the best in the business, you call Sterling Holdings." Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You own a company?" I met her eyes for the first time that night and let the silence stretch between us. "Several," I said quietly. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor, red wine spreading across the white tile like blood. She stared at the mess for a moment, then looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and fear. Marcus seemed to finally pick up on the tension in the room. "Listen, I should probably get back to my family," he said, though he was clearly curious about what he'd walked into. "But, seriously, thank you again for everything this year. Sterling Holdings has been a game changer for my business." After Marcus left, the kitchen remained frozen in stunned silence. Robert was still standing in the doorway, his face cycling through different shades of pale. Sarah's mother had started to clean up the broken wine glass with shaking hands, her pearls clicking against each other with each nervous movement. I could hear whispers starting up in the dining room, fragments of conversations as their guests tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Someone mentioned my company name. Someone else was asking how long I'd been in commercial real estate. The careful social order they'd maintained for years was cracking apart in real time. Robert finally managed to speak, his voice thin and strained. "You own buildings?" I took another sip of scotch and met his gaze steadily. 43 properties across 3 states, I said. Office buildings, apartment complexes, retail spaces. Sterling Holdings manages about $200 million in commercial real estate. The number hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped backward, his hand reaching for the doorframe to steady himself. Victoria made a small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. Sarah was staring at me like she'd never seen me before, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. In that moment, I realized she genuinely had no idea who she'd married. She'd been so convinced by her family's narrative about me that she'd never bothered to ask what I actually did for a living. I stood up from the bar stool and straightened my flannel shirt, feeling taller than I had in years. "I need to get going," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Early meeting tomorrow with the Planning Commission about a new development downtown." I walked past them toward the kitchen door, then stopped and turned back. "By the way, the rent check is due on the 1st of the month, same as always." The confusion on their faces was almost comical. Robert's brow furrowed as he tried to process what I'd said. "Rent check?" I smiled for the first time that night, a cold expression that didn't reach my eyes. "For the house, Robert. Your lease payment to Sterling Holdings. 3 years running now, though I don't think we've ever met in person during a business transaction." The truth hit them like a tsunami. Victoria actually grabbed the counter to keep from falling over. Robert's face went from pale to completely gray. Sarah's eyes went wide with a horror I'd never seen before. "You're our landlord," Sarah whispered. "Have been since you were 6 months behind on your mortgage payments," I confirmed. "The bank was ready to foreclose when I bought the property. You're welcome, by the way." I walked out through the front door that time, leaving them to process the wreckage of everything they thought they knew. The night air was cold and clean, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear raised voices starting up. Confusion, anger, panic as they tried to figure out how they'd gotten everything so wrong. The next few weeks were when things got really interesting. See, the Blackwells didn't take this revelation well. Instead of maybe reflecting on how they'd treated me or attempting some kind of apology, they decided to go on the offensive. It started with anonymous phone calls to city inspectors reporting supposed violations at my properties, fire code issues that didn't exist, safety problems that were pure fiction. Then came the fake online reviews from accounts with no history, claiming I was a slumlord who pressured tenants and ignored maintenance requests. Someone called my insurance company with concerns about my business practices. Anonymous tips went to the housing board about alleged discrimination in my rental policies. It was amateur hour, but it was clearly coordinated, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Robert thought he could pressure me into backing down, maybe force me to sell him the house at below market value or something equally stupid. He'd underestimated me completely. When you manage as much property as I do, documentation becomes your religion. I had maintenance logs, inspection reports, contractor invoices, and tenant testimonials going back years. But I wasn't content to just defend myself. I hired a private investigator to trace all the fake reviews and anonymous complaints. Took about a week to connect them back to a bottom-tier PR firm that Robert had hired to manage the situation. They'd been sloppy, leaving digital fingerprints all over their sabotage attempts. That's when I decided to go nuclear. I took out a full-page advertisement in the regional business journal. No fancy graphics or marketing speak, just the truth laid out in black and white with all the supporting evidence. When family becomes a liability, a case study in professional sabotage. I didn't name Robert or Victoria directly, but anyone in the local business community could connect the dots. The fake review screenshots with their timestamps, the phone logs showing calls from the same number to multiple agencies, even email chains the PI had obtained showing the coordination of their campaign. The fallout was swift and brutal. Robert's own development projects started facing mysterious delays. Permits that should have been routine got lost in the system. City inspectors suddenly became very thorough when reviewing his applications. Investors began pulling out of his deals, citing reputational concerns. Victoria's charity work dried up overnight. The society ladies who'd once competed for invitations to her dinner parties suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Their country club membership got reviewed for the first time in 20 years. Sarah called me every day for 2 weeks, leaving voicemails that started angry and gradually became desperate. "You're destroying my family," she sobbed in one message. "This isn't who you are. We can fix this if we just talk." But I was done talking. I was done pretending their approval mattered to me. I was done being the man who used the back door while they celebrated in the front of the house. Robert tried one last desperate play about a month after Thanksgiving. He called me up, his voice artificially jovial, and invited me for a family dinner to clear the air. Just the four of us. he promised. No guests, no show. I agreed, mostly because I was curious what kind of scheme he'd cooked up. When I arrived at the house, my house, that night, they'd set the dining room table for 4 with their finest china and crystal. Robert greeted me at the front door with a handshake that felt rehearsed, his smile stretched so wide it looked painful. The dinner itself was a formality: overcooked chicken, vegetables that had seen better days, and conversation so forced it was almost comedic. Robert waited until the plates were cleared before he made his pitch. "We've been working on a new development concept," he began, pulling out a manila folder filled with architectural renderings and financial projections. "Mixed-use space downtown, retail on the ground floor, luxury apartments above. We think it could be a real game changer for the city." He slid the folder across the table like he was presenting the Holy Grail. "Obviously, we'd need a partner with experience and capital. Someone who understands the local market and has the right connections." I flipped through the pages, scanning the amateur hour business plan and laughably optimistic financial projections. It was clear they'd thrown this together in desperation, hoping to somehow salvage their reputation by attaching themselves to my success. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, closing the folder and meeting Robert's eyes. "You want me to risk my company's reputation and capital on a project you dreamed up last week, after spending months trying to destroy my business with fake complaints and online reviews?" Robert's face reddened, but he tried to maintain his composure. "That was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Family dynamics, you know how it is. This is business. This is our chance to work together, to build something as a family." I stood up, the chair scraping against their hardwood floors. "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Funny how I suddenly became family when you found out I owned your house." Sarah reached across the table, her eyes glistening with tears. "Please, we can start over. Dad didn't mean for things to go so far." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd spent our entire marriage letting her family define who I was, without ever bothering to find out for herself. "No," I said quietly, "we can't start over, because this isn't where it started. This started the first time you made me walk around to the kitchen door. This started every time they called me lucky for marrying you, and you said nothing." I left the folder on their table and walked out through the front door, feeling like I was shedding an old skin. Behind me, I could hear Sarah crying and Robert's voice rising in anger, but I didn't look back. The divorce papers were straightforward. No shared assets, since everything I'd built predated our marriage. No alimony, since Sarah had never contributed to the business. Clean break, simple signatures, the end of a chapter I should have closed years earlier. Sarah signed without contesting anything. I think by that point she understood that she'd been married to someone she'd never really known, someone she'd never bothered to understand because her family's version of me was easier to accept. 6 months later, I terminated their lease. Nothing vindictive, just a standard 30-day notice citing my intention to renovate the property. They scrambled to find something else in their price range, which turned out to be considerably smaller than what they were used to. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Robert had to take a job working for someone else after his development company folded. Victoria started shopping at regular grocery stores instead of the gourmet markets she'd frequented for decades. They'd moved into a modest townhouse across town, a far cry from the colonial mansion they'd been so proud of. That house sits empty now while I decide what to do with it. I've thought about turning it into luxury apartments or maybe selling it to another family who might appreciate its history. What I won't do is let people live there who think some folks deserve the front door and others belong in the kitchen. Sometimes I drive by their new place, a simple 2-story building in a development that would have horrified them 5 years ago. I don't do it to gloat. I do it to remind myself of what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness, when they assume that quiet competence means you're not worth their respect. The Blackwells taught me something valuable during those years of humiliation and condescension. They taught me that some people will never see your worth, no matter how much you achieve or how patient you are with their ignorance. But they also taught me that building something real, something undeniably successful, gives you the power to walk away from people who don't deserve a place in your life. I've got a new woman in my life now, someone who knew what I did for a living before she knew my last name. She's never asked me to use a back door, never apologized for my work clothes or my truck. When I told her this whole story, she just shook her head and said the Blackwells were idiots for not recognizing what they had. Marcus still sends me deals, bigger projects than ever before. My company continues to grow, and I've never had to explain to anyone why I deserve a seat at the table. I built the table myself, and I choose who sits at it. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't getting even with people who wronged you. It's building a life so successful and fulfilling that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. I spent years trying to earn their respect, when I should have been building something they could never take away. Now when I host holidays, everyone comes through the front door.